Hey there, y'all. Welcome to Honey and Earth Yoga. My name is Kenzie. I'm a certified yoga teacher and a student of all things yoga. Today we're doing something different. So instead of going through a flow, I thought it would be fun, if this is your idea of fun, to do a breakdown of the warrior sequence in yoga. Okay, so why do we care about walking through the warrior sequence? And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that these are very common poses that you will find in pretty much any yoga flow. Most levels of yoga, beginner to advanced, they're going to use some form of warrior. But the problem is some teachers, myself included, take it for granted that you know how to do these poses and that you've gone through and have someone tweak your form so that way you're doing it correctly. And frankly, there's just not a lot of time for us to go through and nitpick the finer points of warrior. The second reason is pretty practical. If you do some of these poses incorrectly, they're pretty safe, but there is a chance that you could kind of tweak your back a little bit. Whenever I was doing Warrior 1 specifically, I was recovering from a broken foot and I thought like, this really hurts. And it turns out I was doing it wrong and nobody told me. I only found out during my yoga teacher training, which was nuts. The third reason comes down to this concept in yoga called sthira. When we translate the word sthira, we're talking about stability. So it's whenever you find a pose and you feel strong and confident in it, you're not wobbling or leaning one way, you feel stable and confident in these poses. And that's one of the main goals of yoga. So sthira is one side of it, and then sukha is another. Sukha means ease. You'll notice I'm sitting in a pose right now called sukhasana, which means easy pose. Which is funny because it's actually not easy for a lot of people, but I digress. So the reason that we're going through these poses is because we want you to work on your stability and sense of ease in these poses. If you find Warrior 3 really painful or challenging or like it hurts your back, you're not going to be able to get very much out of the flow that your teacher is providing you. So that's why it's so important to go through these poses, even if you think that you know how to do them. So instead of doing some kind of like big flow, today we're mostly going to be workshopping Warrior 1, Warrior 2, and Warrior 3. You're only going to need a couple of things for this, and they're all optional. I would highly recommend a set of blocks. You can get these online pretty cheaply for about 10 bucks. But if you don't have any blocks, you can also, I've had to get creative. I have used Tupperware and I have used really thick books. But basically the gist is that you want something around that you can rest your hands on at various heights whenever we come into Warrior 3. So I highly encourage you to get those props and set them to the side of your mat before doing this. But before we jump into workshopping these poses, let's take a moment of mindfulness. Come into an easy seat. If you are choosing, it can be a literal sukhasana, like what I've got here. It could be crisscross applesauce. You could also come into a version of hero's pose. So find a place where you're comfortable. Let your eyes rest just for a few seconds. Let's take an inhale. Hold at the top. 1, 2, 3. Exhale it all out. Let's do one more of those. Inhale. Hold 1, 2, 3. Exhale. I like to take a few quiet moments of reflection even before working on form. This helps us approach our practice with humility, with a sense of where our body is in space. And to be honest, just a good sense of humor. It will really take you far in your yoga practice. Let's take one more breath here. Let it all out. You can flutter the eyes open. Roll control the head and neck. Maybe you take some intuitive stretches with the arm, nothing crazy here. Our focus is going to be on this little workshop portion, but it's nice to wake up the body just a little bit. All right. When you're ready to move a little, let's meet in tabletop just for a second. Let's take a few cat-cows to warm up the spine. Inhale, cow. Head goes to the ceiling. Not head, gaze. Your gaze goes to the ceiling. Exhale, cat. Inhale, cow. Exhale, cat. Inhale, cow. Exhale, cat. Come into a tabletop. Tuck those toes and slowly press into down dog. Pedal out your dog. We're just waking up the feet and the muscles here to do our work with warrior today. Pedal it out. Maybe shake your head. Shake no. Nod yes. Gorgeous. Take a breath in. Exhale, look forward. Inhale, step the feet together to the top of the mat. Inhale, half lift. Exhale, fold. Inhale, half lift. Exhale, fold. Grab opposite elbows for a nice stretch here. On your exhale, drop the arms down. Inhale, half lift. Exhale, drop. Inhale, come up into standing mountain. Gaze looks up to the ceiling. Exhale, hands come down. Feel a little warm now? I feel warm. Okay, so now that we feel a little bit warm, we are going to progress through the warrior sequence. So if you're not familiar with that, there are 3 main versions of warrior, 1, 2, and 3. There are some other variations, but we're not going to get too fancy today. We're just going to keep it to the basics. If you take a class with a teacher who really likes their Sanskrit, they won't call this warrior, they will call it Virabhadrasana. Virabhadrasana 1, 2, and 3. So if you ever hear that, that's what this pose is. So with that said, let's get into warrior 1. So what we need to do for this pose, we're going to start off facing the front of our mat. And I'm going to start with the legs first, okay? So let's take our right foot. And what we're going to do is take that right foot forward, bend the knee, bring the left foot back as far back as is comfortable. Now, warrior 1 is, in my opinion, the most challenging part of this sequence because it requires a lot of bendiness and joint flexibility if you do it the traditional way. There's a reason why a lot of teachers will actually have you do high crescent lunge instead of warrior 1, okay? So if warrior 1 is not feeling good, it's totally fine to modify to do high crescent lunge. If your yoga teacher gives you a hard time, they need to take a chill pill. Okay, so anyway, so we've got our legs in this position. So let's take a minute here to check in. So we've got our right foot is facing forward. We've got a bend in that right knee. Now, the key here is to have our hips facing the front of the mat. There's this temptation to twist this way. These hips are for warrior 2, okay? But warrior 1, if you want to see where your hips are, just put your fingers on your hips and shine them forward like a headlight. I don't know why, but that metaphor stuck with me when I had a teacher say that. So our fingers are pointing forward. weight is evenly distributed between the 2 feet. The other key here is the back foot, and this is the one that gets a lot of people. My foot is at a 45-degree angle. You can't see that very well though because of my blocks. Okay, let's try that again. So my back foot is at a 45-degree angle. This is a pretty aggressive angle for a lot of people. It requires a lot of ankle mobility that not a lot of us have. Okay, so it's gonna look like this. Okay, might wanna bend into that front knee just a little bit. And these are what the legs look like, okay? So if you ever think, is my foot at a 45-degree angle? Because it's really hard to be mindful of that when you're in the middle of a flow. So that's the reason why I've used this mat today. It's called a Lifeform mat. They're really expensive. You don't have to buy one. But if you can borrow one, it's really helpful because you'll be able to see whether your feet are at a 45-degree angle. So this line right here, this rainbow line, right, y'all, that is a 45-degree angle. They made this like that on purpose. So I can see that my foot is in alignment with that, and I know that I'm good to go. So, all right, so we've got our hips facing forward. We've got our front leg bent, back leg and back foot are at a 45-degree angle. So what we're gonna do is come into the arms, which is blessedly the least complicated part of this. Traditionally, you'll see Warrior One arms are up. So you could just have them up by the ears. We don't wanna hunch up, right? We don't wanna bring our shoulders up to our ears because that creates a lot of tension in the neck. Don't you feel tense doing that? So bring them down, have some space here, okay? Take a breath in. Exhale. Beautiful job. Now, I'm gonna get out of this pose because my ankle's hurting. That's just one of the ways that we can do Warrior One arms, okay? So we've got our arms up, but we could also take them into a tree pose. This is nice if you don't have a lot of shoulder mobility or you just don't like how this feels. So this is another option, okay? I'm gonna switch legs. I'm gonna take my left foot forward and my right foot back. So when we're workshopping poses, totally fine to switch sides, especially when it's not feeling that great. There was a workshop I took at a teacher training where we literally were in Warrior One for 30 minutes. The horror. So ultimately our Warrior One, we're wanting it to look something along the lines of this or this. Your teacher might get crazy and ask you to do something else with the arms. You can do all kinds of variations. This is the one that's the most common, okay? So what if you're trying Warrior One and you're like, girl, I do not bend that way? Totally fine. That is what yoga is for, is to help you regain some of your bendiness. So that's why a lot of teachers will not do Warrior One. They will actually do a crescent lunge, which is similar, but it's not as aggressive on that back foot. So crescent lunge is gonna look like this. We're gonna bring our right foot forward, left foot back, front leg is bent. The key though is that our back foot, do you see how my heel is up off the ground? This is what makes this a crescent lunge, okay? And I'm gonna feel a lot more sensation, not in the back of my leg, but actually in the hip here, okay? So it does engage a different part of your body, but if it makes this pose accessible to you, I say go for it. So we can have our hands in Warrior One, tree. You can keep them on your hips if you want. Some people like to take them out to the side. This is great if you want Sthira. We were talking about stability, feeling like you're not gonna wibble wobble when you're in this pose, okay? So play around with it, see what arm placement you like, and don't be afraid to modify if you find a pose that feels better. Okay, so that is Warrior One. You did a great job. Now we're gonna move into Warrior Two, which is probably the one that you're more familiar with. So Warrior Two, we're gonna face this side of our mat, okay? So we are going to take our front foot, that front knee is bent, back leg is straight. Now the difference here is in the placement of the hips and that back foot. So the back foot is parallel with my mat, okay? And then my hips, they're facing this way, out to the side, okay? Now, it's tempting, I do this a lot, I shouldn't, but I do, to do what I call like a milquetoast version of Warrior Two, where like you're kind of high up, right? And so it's totally fine if this is your edge, this is where you're pushing it, you feel a lot of sensation here, that's totally fine. What I'm talking about is when you're tired in class and you're like, I wonder if I could get away with this really high warrior. And not always, not always. So what we want to do is take the lowest warrior possible that feels good for us, because remember, this is a stretch, it's also an active pose. So for me, I'm going to inch out a little bit, okay? And kind of play with the placement here. See where you're comfortable. You might be fine in a lower warrior for a little bit and then decide, I'm kind of tired. Inch those feet in, see what feels good, okay? So that's part one. Part two is we're gonna consider our hips, okay? So it's not as aggressive a hip stretch as Warrior One, but there's a big trap here. And the trap is when I turn to the side, okay? Whoa, okay, there we go. All right, so you can see how my hips are tucked here, right? Like I'm a pretty straight line. A lot of people who are new will take it like this. Do you see that curve in my spine? See? You see the difference? So when we have our weight distributed like this, there's a little crunching that happens here in the lower back, and it's not gonna feel awesome, okay? And we're not gonna get the full benefit of this pose either. We call this banana back because you're kind of like this, like a banana, okay? So what we want to do is gently tuck those hips in so we're in a straight line. So if yoga teacher is ever telling you, tuck your hips, this is what they're talking about. It means that you've inadvertently stuck your booty out and need to come back in, okay? So that's the main points for the legs. Now we're going to move into the arms for Warrior Two. Again, the simplest part. Woohoo! So actually, I lied. We're going to do one more thing with the legs. One of the important things about Warrior Two is alignment, okay? So we don't want our legs to be off over here and then over here, right? We want them to be in a straight line. So what I like to do is whenever I'm workshopping my Warrior Two form, I will actually go and workshop it up against a wall, so that way you can feel what it's like to have your feet being in a straight line, okay? So the goal here is to have the back foot parallel and the front foot should roughly bisect that back foot, okay? So if your foot's over here or over here, you can see I'm wobbling, right? Like it doesn't feel good and I'm not experiencing stira. I'm not experiencing stability here. So that's why trying to keep things in a straight line is so important. And again, if you can have your hands on one of these mats while workshopping your form, it's really helpful because that center line will tell you whether your form is on point or not. Okay, now my spiel about the legs is over, so we're going to move into the arms. So most of the time, Warrior Two arms are going to be out to a T, okay? So we want that to be relatively in line with our shoulder, okay? We don't want them to be down here or up here unless your teacher tells you they want them up here, okay? So we want to be making a T shape. Now, the difference here is that you can play with the arms a little bit. So if you've had some shoulder difficulties or this just doesn't feel very good, you can always take the hands to the hips here, okay? Or you can come into, again, tree arms. And those are usually the two most common variations that you'll see with Warrior Two, because most teachers want you to have your hands accessible for whatever pose they want you to do next, right? So sort of this pose that we do when we're getting ready to do something. But congratulations, this is Warrior Two. Okay, so we've had our feet in some pretty aggressive shapes, so let's take some stretches here before we go into Warrior Three, which, not to scare you, but it is a pretty aggressive balancing pose, okay? I used to hate this pose, but I've gotten to where I like it, so hopefully I can help you get to a place where you're cool with it too. All right, so I like to kind of pony the feet a little bit. Get the blood flowing back in there again. Maybe you press the toes onto the mat. Let's take a mountain pose here. Inhale. Exhale. One more time, inhale. Okay, so you're calm and centered, and that's the perfect time to approach balancing pose. If you'd like a little bit more time before you try Warrior 3, just pause the video and take a few more breaths until you feel ready. So Warrior 3 is the last in the Warrior sequence, and it's a pretty aggressive balancing pose like I mentioned. So what we're gonna do when we're workshopping Warrior 3, we're gonna grab our blocks, or if you are DIYing it, your Tupperware or books. I'm not here to judge. What I would suggest if you have blocks is put them on the highest setting. You can always go lower, okay? So start high and then go low depending on what sensation you want, okay? So for this pose, we are going to face this direction of our mat. We're gonna put our blocks in front of us about shoulder width apart, okay? So what we wanna do for Warrior 3, we're gonna have our feet shoulder width apart. Okay, we're gonna take a deep breath. And you usually kick into this on an exhale. I'm going to kick my right foot back. My left foot is going to, not my left foot, my left leg is going to be the supporting leg, okay? So, all right, so you can see that I am bending down. We wanna be about perpendicular with the ground here, okay? So a lot of people will lock the supporting leg, but I recommend, I'm gonna bring that foot down. I recommend not locking that leg. Generally in yoga, we try to avoid locking joints. There's some places where you'll need to do it, like a handstand or something. But whenever we are balancing, it's important to have some springiness, because that means that there is some potential energy there that I can use to rescue myself if I am balancing and I get off balance, right? So if I'm up in the Warrior 3, my knee is locked, right? There's not a lot of places that I can go if I start to go, whoa, I'm gonna fall, right? We wanna keep just a very slight micro bend in that knee, okay? I'm gonna come here so you can see better. Okay. Okay, so the supporting leg has a small micro bend, so let's talk about the leg that comes into the air, okay? I would encourage you to keep this this foot flexed. It's, when we keep it pointed, it looks really pretty on Instagram and all that stuff, but flexed, again, like a micro bend in the knee, is going to keep you safe if you need to drop suddenly. It's a lot easier to find support with my foot like this than, it's pointed and oop, I might smash myself. You might think that won't happen, but I'm pretty sure I broke my foot one time doing that. Not yoga, but something else. So that's why we flex. I know it doesn't look sexy, but that's the reason why. It's just a little bit safer, and it also works different muscles than the leg. Okay, so we've got our feet down, so let's come back into Warrior 3. Okay, so the goal is to be perpendicular, right? That's the ultimate goal. You don't have to do that, especially if you're new to this pose and it's really aggressive, okay? So some people say like, you gotta go all the way. Like, no, you don't have to do that. Any progress is good progress here, okay? So if your Warrior 3 looks like this, where that back foot is, just probably a foot off the ground, that's fine. You don't have to do the full expression of the pose, especially if you're new to the practice or you have an injury. You can always go harder, but it's better to start with the easy version first and then work your way up instead of having to pull back from a really extreme pose, because that could hurt you, okay? And we don't want that. We don't want that. So at this point, we've got the legs down. Let's talk about the arms, okay? There's a lot of ways to do the arms in Warrior 3. The reason that I asked you to get your blocks here is because, again, remember, we're gonna work our way from the baseline pose to something more challenging with the balancing, okay? So what I recommend to people who are new to Warrior 3, if you're bendy, okay, you still have to have some flexibility in the muscles in the back of the legs for this, okay? So approach this slowly, okay? We're gonna come into our balance, and our hands are going to come rest on the tops of these blocks, okay? This is gonna help me practice kicking that leg into a perpendicular shape instead of say being here. It's okay if you're here, but if you can, this is an opportunity to get that shape, okay? Now, the downside is that this is still a pretty deep stretch for the supporting leg, okay? So, gonna come out of that. So the pose might not be accessible even with blocks, but it's just something to try. This is just one option with the blocks. We can also play with what height we have the blocks at, okay? I have the blocks at maximum height right now. I can also take them down to level 2, okay? This is, gonna make it more likely that my leg is going to kick off higher, and it's going to require me to have that body awareness of bringing it within that proper angle, okay? We don't want to kick it up like that. That's a different pose, okay? Now, Warrior 3, we want the hips to point to the front of the room, okay? So resist the urge to turn that hip out. So avoid twisting the hip like that. We want it to point towards the ground and to the top of the room, okay? Oh, are you sweaty? Because I'm getting sweaty. I'm getting sweaty from all the balancing. Okay, so let's say you tried the blocks and you think like, this is still pretty, like I'm not getting a lot of sensation this way. I want to try a balancing pose. Okay, so we're going to pretend the blocks are not here. And we're going to come into the more traditional expression of Warrior 3 that you'll see on all the cool yoga pamphlets, okay? Okay, so to do that, we're going to come onto our support leg. In this case, it's our left leg. Soft micro bend in that knee. Going to tip the right foot back, flexed foot. Okay, so once I am in that perpendicular shape, my hands in the traditional form are going to come even with my shoulders. Okay, so this is the traditional form, but this puts a lot of strain on the core, okay? It's a very intense core exercise to keep yourself in proper form and not fall over. Okay, so in my experience, having the hands like this deepens the balancing, like the challenge of the balance, okay? So there are a couple of other options we can use to explore Warrior 3 without doing the full expression, especially if you're like, that's not gonna happen, okay? So let's come into our Warrior 3 one more time. Take an inhale. Exhale. Inhale. On your exhale, tip into your Warrior 3. So the first option, the first alternative here is to keep your hands on your hips, okay? This is great if you want to just focus on the lower body aspect of this pose. The other option is to put the hands out in a T. I love T-shaped arms here because if you're wobbly, having that extra, having that extra stability can prevent you from falling over, okay? So it's totally fine to take the arms out like that, especially if this is a new or a challenging pose for you. If you want to just baby step your way into the traditional arms, another option that I like is to use tree arms, okay? So we're still getting some shoulder involvement here. I'm having to work my abs, but my hands aren't all the way out, okay? So it's just a little bit easier on the arms. The most important thing to remember about Warrior 3 is this is a balancing pose, okay? It may seem like not a big deal to a lot of people, but it does require a lot of mindfulness and stability while you're doing it, okay? So if at any time you feel unstable, don't freak out and say like, I'm gonna fall! Okay, wait, I am guilty of that. I am like such a stressful yogi, it's hilarious. But anyway, so instead of saying like, oh my God, it's happening, oh my God, just calmly put down the back foot and bring the hips to neutral, okay? And my advice would be don't try to attempt a balance if you feel like it's off or you're having like a weird day, or if you do want to attempt one, please use your blocks and come into it slowly, okay? So with that said, you have successfully gone through Warrior 1, 2, and 3. So come join me for a little seat on our mat and we'll talk about what we just did. Oh. I didn't think I was going to get a workout, but it was a little bit of a workout. I don't know if it was for you. I hope so. All right, let's take a few breaths here to just reset. One more. Fantastic job. I know going through form like this may not be like super sexy or whatever, but it will help your practice improve. It will keep you stable, and it could even help reduce some joint or muscle discomfort. And since a lot of yoga teachers don't really, we just don't have time to go through and tweak every single student's warrior form, it's always good to check in on that on your own and see where you're at and always keep improving. With that said, if your yoga teacher says something different than to what I've said, that's an opportunity for a conversation with them. Everybody is different. There are a lot of different yoga traditions, so don't think that because I've said something that contradicts what they do that someone's wrong. So please leave a comment if you have any questions, or please go talk to your yoga teacher if you want to explore these topics more. With that said, let's close out our practice. Take an inhale. On your exhale, bring your hands out to the side. Inhale, hands come up. Look to the ceiling. Exhale, prayer hands at your heart. I thank you for coming to the mat today with humility, with respect for your body, with a heart that honors the lineage of yoga, the teachers from ancient India who have brought this to us and kept it alive for us. Inhale. Exhale. Om Shanti. Go in peace.